Hi there, and welcome back to Season 2 of SciBurst, a popular culture podcast about science and entertainment. We are your hosts, Ella
and Isabel, two science communicators and sci-fi nerds steering this spaceship alongside guests into the multiverse of science fun. Today's episode, cars, renewable energy, and Australia as a sustainability hub.
And this episode, like all of the episodes this season, is going to be structured a little differently because today we have a very special guest. Isaac Martin is here with us in the studio.
Hello, hello.
Woo! I'm so excited to dive into this awesome conversation today and talk about all the cool things Isaac knows about and all the wonderful ways our brains all combine together. But before we do that, it's really important that we acknowledge that this episode of SciBurst is being recorded on Ngunnawal and Ngambri country. Dowra Nuna, Dowra Ngunnawal, Yangu, Nalamanyin, Dunimanyin, Ngunnawal Wari, Dawwa Wari, Dindi, Wangiralid Yin. This is Ngunnawal country. Today, we are all meeting together on Ngunnawal country. We acknowledge and pay our respects to the elders. And we extend that respect to all the elders and all the country that you are listening to this episode of SciBurst on.
Thanks, Ella. So I'm going to give a bit of an intro to the topic today, and it's actually going to be an Australia-focused episode, which I feel like we've been waiting to do for a really long time.
So exciting.
So we're pretty keen to do this. So there's been lots of developments around renewable energy and sustainable transport, and especially in Australia. Now, at the time of recording, there's a proposal that's just come out to build the world's biggest renewables hub in the Australian desert, and this would be a big $100 billion wind and solar project starting at the South Australian border and stretching west for hundreds of k's through Western Australia. And they'll also be partnering with First Nations landowners. And Australia also has the largest pipeline of green hydrogen projects globally at an estimated value of over $225 billion. Now, it's very clear that Australia has much, to use Ella's favourite word, #potential, as a sustainability leader and clean energy superpower. And you could also say solar punk potential, wink, wink. So we're going to dive more into this with our really cool guest and also have a little bit of a look at it against ideas from Australian identity and pop culture. So I'm going to hand over to Ella to introduce our guest today.
So excited I got to introduce Isaac. Glad I didn't have to wrestle you for that, but I think I would have. Our guest today is a very special friend of ours, including one of our former cybernetic colleagues, Isaac Martin. So Isaac has literally just a few weeks ago finished his Bachelor of Engineering Research and Development, specialising in renewable energy systems here at the ANU. Previously, Isaac has been a research intern working to improve the efficiency of direct solar to hydrogen generation, a research assistant analysing Australia's technical heritage to inform a positive future, and also project lead of the ANU solar racing team, leading a team to build solar cars to race across the Australian desert. Pretty cool. But right now, Isaac is an engineer at WindLab working to make fossil fuels obsolete. Isaac's current role is to work on potential future wind farm sites and support current WindLab projects. Isaac loves hiking, basketball, and board games. And with interests in renewable energy, electric vehicles, and a just energy transition for all, Isaac is the perfect guest, we think, for us to close out this season of SciBurst with and lead us into our next season, ... So let's kick off. Isaac, there are so many types of engineering out there. Why did you pick the renewable energy study path?
Oh, wow. And thank you for having me both. I can't believe this is the last episode of this season. The stakes are high. Yeah, I'm excited to be here today. I studied renewable engineering or renewable energy systems engineering because I actually found in high school we were doing a science sort of module on renewable and future energies. And there was a scientist who came into our high school. His name was Dr. David Osmond. And I just knew him as a wind farm engineer. But little did I know that he was actually at WindLab and had been working on transitioning the ACT's electricity to 100% renewable, which we actually achieved in 2019. So Dr. Dave is part of WindLab and was one of the first ones to set up WindLab as a renewable energy developer, and came in and inspired us all young high school students about the future of energy and electricity generation. And that really inspired me to focus on that as a career path. So yeah.
Wow, what a circular moment. Did you walk into the WindLab doors and then you were like, whoa, you're here?
Yeah, I think I saw him come in for a guest lecture on one of the courses I was doing and recognized him and the ethos of what WindLab were doing. So that sort of school's outreach program directly affected my life. And I think that maybe we don't necessarily reflect on that all the time, that those outreach programs make a real difference in people's lives. But I think it's quite nice that, that's made my life different.
Yeah, so cool. For all our listeners out there who have heard of engineering and have heard of renewable energy systems, but maybe don't know exactly what those two words mean combined together, could you give like a little spiel about what the types of things are that you study and that you want to work on?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the classic engineering description is solving problems, which is obviously quite vague because I think engineers can do lots of different things. In my mind, working on engineering is like applying science, so using cutting edge ideas that we've learnt from the understanding or curiosity of learning new things, and then applying that to solve real world problems. So engineering can come in lots of different ways and in lots of different systems. And thinking about systems is a particular flavour of engineering that ANU teaches. So I've done a systems engineering degree. So I think about how things work together and how they could be improved in different ways. So then if we think more about energy and our electricity network, then a renewable energy systems engineering degree is thinking about our electricity generation, where we get that energy from, and how we use it, and how that system works together and how it could be improved.
Feels like a lot to squeeze into a short 5 years.
Big degree. Lots of fun.
And we probably have some listeners who might even be thinking about doing that degree. So are there any particular maybe courses that you took during that you would recommend that you thought you got a lot out of, that sort of style of thinking?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we were just talking about thermodynamics, which is...
We were.
Isaac's prized textbook.
Yeah, my favorite textbook. I wouldn't necessarily recommend thermodynamics as your first engineering course, but understanding how systems work in like a really abstract way. So thinking about in engineering, sometimes what we do is we black box something, which you have to be careful with because the whole idea of a black box is you don't know what happens inside. But what it does mean you can do is you can abstract what that function is happening, like what's happening inside the black box. So we could give that box some information and something will happen afterwards. And if we understand what it's doing to that whatever information or electricity or energy, whatever we're using, as long as we understand what it's doing and where the potential boundaries of that function are, then we can use that box for a whole lot of different arrangements and creating different systems and functions. So I think we learnt that systems engineering approach in some of our first year core courses. So that whole idea of thinking about a function and then using that to build something bigger. I think we built a robot that navigated a maze in first year engineering.
Cool.
With those concepts. Yeah. Lots of fun.
And do you reckon that's kind of a more like ANU thing, ANU specific thing, or are we seeing that in engineering degrees in general around Australia?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure about Australia in general. I think we're getting better as a society of understanding complexity and our approaches to complexity. I don't know if you would agree, but I think that it's important. An important aspect of any sort of education is understanding the complexity of the system you're working in. So I'm hopeful that our education system, as complex as it is working towards that goal.
I feel like particularly with interdisciplinary recognition. So the recognition that what you're learning and doing touches the boundaries of other disciplines, even if you're in a maths class and you're not in physics until later in the afternoon, but they do all interact. I feel like with that conceptual understanding becoming larger, I think that opens up more pathways for like a systems or a complex thinking to emerge. But I would say the bubble of academia is probably makes me think that systems and complex thinking is a lot more popular than it is. But I do see that potentially being a trend over like, maybe the next 5 years.
Yeah, totally.
I hope so. But I mean, that's my biased opinion. But anyway, so Isaac, we mentioned before that you work for the renewable energy company, WindLab. What are the most exciting developments you see in practice and academia? And also, is there a bit of a time lag between them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the renewable energy industry, as you pointed to about the potential for a super hub, is moving to integrated projects which are much bigger for supporting our network as the coal generation power plants, as they start to go offline, and they've done a great job as long as they have. As they start to retire, we need to make sure that there's enough energy in the network. So we need to have bigger energy generation systems. And Australia is super lucky that we've had a really amazing solar households program, or rebates for household solar. So I think just a few weeks ago, we passed 4 million households with solar. And we're the highest per capita. Yeah, really cool. And highest per capita in the world, I think, for solar installations. So that's a really exciting idea, to have so much generation directly where people are living and using electricity. But a problem with solar that everyone points out is that it's not sunny at night.
Even though
So
Australia
true.
is a very sunny country.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was not
Even
at
we
nighttime.
don't have sun at
Yeah,
night.
even
So with that astute observation, some quite smart engineers figured out that wind is actually higher if you go up to about 150 meters, which is where the new wind turbines are. It's actually windier at night and in the evenings when everyone's using electricity. So that's why it's important as well to have wind in your energy mix, because it generates energy which is at a different time to the solar. So we're creating these really large integrated projects now across Australia, where there's solar, wind, and battery technology being used interchangeably or together, and as like a cooperative system. But it's taken a little while to get there, and I think academia has been well ahead of the curve in terms of the battery technology that they're using and advancing solar efficiencies. And it's great that now we're seeing all these batteries and solar and wind farms come online that are integrated together.
So do we kind of see like a experiment to case study to implementation to scale model? Is that kind of what's happening between academia and practice at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. And scale is a really tricky thing to get right. One sort of energy story in Australia, which is still being explored, is the idea of solar thermal, where you point a whole bunch of mirrors towards a receiver and you focus all the sunlight on this molten salt, and then you use the salt to heat up water and generate electricity that way. And it's been trialed a few times, but it hasn't been found to work at scale in a commercial way yet in Australia. So some of those projects haven't had the same scale as you would see with wind and solar projects, which are getting bigger and bigger in Australia because they're just so much cheaper than other electricity and energy generation. So yeah, they're quite successful.
So is that thermal one more for like a personal household use or like a business? Like how far until it gets, I don't know, like not helpful?
Oh, interesting. That's an interesting question. I think the idea of using a mirror to focus sunlight is you can use that in lots of different applications. You might have solar hot water heating on your house, which is actually different to solar electricity generation. So solar hot water heating is usually just mirrors or a black tube that just heats up the water like that. So that could be one form of solar thermal energy that you might be using in your house already.
And what's it like working at a company like WindLab? what does a day in the life look like? I'm actually really interested to know.
Yeah,
and I think our listeners will be
Wake
too.
up, save the planet, go home, smile on my face.
It is a great place to work because you do really feel like your work's making a proper impact. I'm really lucky to have had some really fun days recently, actually. We managed to go out to site pretty recently. So when we're building a wind farm, you need to make sure it's windy. So we have these measuring devices to measure the wind. And we have to go out and check them. And one of them is called a wind cube. It's quite cute.
I love that.
Isaac showed me videos of this before, and it's maybe my new favorite thing ever. I want a wind cube. Oh my goodness.
So it's got the wind cube is basically like a white box, probably about 50 centimeters cubed, with a big window in the top of it that it uses to shoot light, like laser, sensors up into the air, and it can create a cone of wind speeds, which then you use to understand the wind speed on the site. And it has a little windscreen wiper to wipe the lens on top.
It's so cute.
And so we have to go fill up the water tanks to keep the windscreen wiper wiping.
Right? Oh my God.
So we keep the wind cubes going. So sometimes we're out and we'll be in the middle of nowhere, working on a property, fixing up the little wind cubes. So that's a fun day in the life.
I'm going to go and look this up now afterwards.
So Australia is like a little bit of a hub we've kind of explored for renewable energy projects. I think a lot of people would associate solar energy with Australia, but potentially not our renewable wind energy. Do you think there is a potential future where Australia is like really proud of its wind energy and we're kind of like an icon for that as well? Or do you think Australia, it's a hot place, we've got a big desert, solar is always going to be like our cultural identity when it comes to renewable?
I guess like I've touched on before, like previously, we're working an integrated system to use systems again for the third or fourth time today. I think hopefully my hope is that we as Australia better understand where our electricity comes from. I think right now we sort of plug the kettle in and turn the kettle on and
Don't think about what happens.
Nice cup of tea. Yeah, we don't necessarily think about what happens.
I definitely don't.
Yeah. And more we're heading to a world where what's happening matters, because we might be relying on solar power that's on our roof. So it's better for us to use electricity in the middle of the day if we can, just because that's more efficient. Or if we can't use electricity in the middle of the day, then we need to store it somehow. So, or we can have more wind generation. So my hope would be that Australia has I think we already have a fair cultural identity with the sun. So we could maybe use that more as an understanding of how to use energy or when we should be using energy. There's a really interesting researcher, Rex Martin, over in the ANU Centre for Energy Systems, who did some social research on how we could be exploring feedback in a future electricity grid. And one of those ways is to include how you should be using your energy on the weather report on the weekly news.
Oh, wait, I love that.
So we could have, it's going to be sunny tomorrow. Good day to do your washing. Or good day to do something that might be energy intensive.
So some of the information that we already integrate into part of our days that we check frequently, kind of pairing like an energy literacy with that.
Yeah, exactly.
Because we kind of do it for like, it's going to be really sunny at these times of day, wear sunscreen at these times too. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so you could think about, well, if our energy mix has more wind in it, then the combination of wind and sunny might be the perfect time to do, all the chores you've been putting off, like perfect dishwashing time.
Those off though.
This is just making me think about a recent piece of Australian pop culture that Ella and I actually talked about recently by an ANU academic. He wrote a children's book, which is all about like clean energy in Australia. So we are starting to see that sort of thinking appear in like fiction books, and
Yeah, I think when it comes to energy literacy, it's like a whole of life upscaling at once. We're now at a point, I guess, as you were saying earlier, that it's increasingly important to understand the whole, like, or a larger part of the system that we're living in. So I guess like these integrated approaches are really important, because at the same time as we're upskilling, you know, like the 30-year-olds who are just coming into like maybe owning a house or like living by themselves for the first time, how they should use energy. We're also trying to upskill kindergarteners with books such as Amy's Balancing Act.
Yeah.
And at the same time, people in retirement homes. Like we're trying to do almost like a mass skill upping all at the same time.
Yeah. Yes, very true.
Yeah, and I think that as much as that's a hopeful thing, it has the risk or potential of being quite negative. And I think we've seen that used in the media, especially around some of the coal plants retiring. There's a fear that could lead to a more unstable network or grid. And whenever we see blackouts or issues with the power network, we also see sometimes some fear-mongering around whether that's renewables that are causing those issues. And most of the time it's not. And regardless, we need to move to net zero. We need to get to zero emissions as fast as we can. So figuring out how we do that in the most effective way is really important.
It's really interesting. I went to a panel recently at South by Southwest Sydney that was talking about, is marketing and advertising the answer to misinformation and more sustainable business practices?
Oh, okay.
So from a marketer's perspective, of course, you want to say that your industry is going to help dig people out of this little bit of a hole of like false truth and fake news that we found ourselves in, where there's a lot of competing information out there. But I think it's really interesting, particularly in the case of places like BP, who created the carbon footprint, and their whole marketing campaign was, what are you doing about the planet? Don't worry about what we're doing. What are you doing about the planet? And that was really, really successful, to the point that 20-something years later, a lot of people don't know that the carbon footprint terminology came from a petroleum group. And this panel was kind of saying, like, if marketing got us into this hole, marketing can get us back out. Which is just like something really interesting to focus on. So I think particularly we've got, I think, a lack of science journalists, a little bit of a distrust in the news media, particularly in Australia at the moment, where our sources of information are going to come from when they're not public education systems.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
It's interesting what you say about the media too, Ella, because we are starting to see some sort of radical sustainability stuff appear in mainstream media. So earlier this year, there was actually a solar punk article that made it into ABC News, which is the Australia media channel. And so that to me is a sign that it is entering our cultural consciousness, and the media wants to use it in a positive way and promote like sustainability thinking. There's also a young Australian couple who are building a sustainability game as well, like large
it's
MMO.
a massive online multiplayer.
Yes, yeah, where you're going to build solar panels, and it's all focused around the community, and it's really adorable.
Great.
So yeah,
it's cool that those things are coming out. Yeah, definitely like lots of little pieces of movement we see in these areas, and I think one of the main pieces is going to be tying it all together so that the messaging and the information is like consistent and makes sense, and is appropriately targeted to your audiences, so that it gets stepped up in the terms of I guess like information that you get.
Yeah, absolutely.
Know your audience. Yes, and promote positivity too. So Isaac, you talked a little bit about how the sun is associated with Australian identity. I want to talk a little bit about cars and Australian identity, and cars and Australian pop culture. So we were all part of the ANU Solar Car team at one point as well, in various different roles. So yeah, like I said, cars are a big part of Australian identity, and I think this stems from the vastness of the landscape and needing an appropriate vehicle to traverse it, and also the lingering sort of bush ranger explorer mentality, a way to conquer the quote-unquote tyranny of distance. And road trips through the outback are also almost treated as a rite of passage growing up here. And we also see this reflected in Australian pop culture through movies like Mad Max, through the classic barbecue debate of Holden versus Ford, through car enthusiast festivals like Summernats, and also through advertisements where cars drive through the desert, like Telstra's latest cybersecurity ad. But unfortunately, this pop culture is still sort of focused on petrol cars and also a little colonial. Bit of a lingering obsession here with having your big V8 engine, and I think it's also quite hyper masculine. But projects like Solar Car take a very different approach and are creating a space for a different and updated form of Australian identity. So, Isaac, on Solar Car, how does this project drive community passion for sustainable innovation? What do people get out of seeing the Bridgestone World Solar Challenge?
Oh, wow. Yeah. That's a great intro into and segue into solar cars. For those who haven't seen a solar car as well, because I'd love to describe it audio visually.
I'm so excited for this.
Because they look quite strange. So usually there's only one person who sits in a solar car and they have quite a perspex bubble that they sit in. And then they're surrounded by a nice sort of maybe 2 or 3 dining table sized solar panel. And they have sometimes 3, sometimes 4 wheels. And they have to drive across the desert, as we all know. 3,000 kilometers is the World Solar Challenge that the ANU team compete in. And I think they're an amazingly hopeful technology. I think as you're talking about future ideas of transportation and sustainability, they pair those really well. And changing the idea of what a car means as well. Like a car is quite an individual thing a lot of times. Like my sister just got a new ute. She works on a farm, so she needs a ute. And unfortunately, she can't afford an electric one yet, so she's got a petrol one. But it's a really nice new V6 Hilux that is hers now, and she has this real identity to it, and she loves to drive it around and take the sheep around or move farm equipment. And so I think that that's like a really positive thing for her, and it gives her independence. And like you were saying before, we live in a country that's very sparsely populated a lot of the time, so you really do need a car. And then a solar car, even though it's transporting only one person, is a massive team effort, huge team effort. And so they also create this idea of community around technology, and people have this shared sense of ownership. And I know that we're only talking about a car that can transport one person, but I think it does expand the imagination to think about other ways you might transport that many people, or you might do it sustainably. So I'm a big fan of a solar car.
I think there's a really interesting idea of like innovation and technology down to the individual level when we talk about cars. So if you own a car that's like, again, Isaac was saying, like it's your personal kind of vehicle and you identify a lot with it. We saw way back early when cars were first introduced to Australia, those were the types of cars that you would learn to repair by hand. Oftentimes that would be the car would be passed down generation to generation.
Yes.
And then, 3 generations later, it's a classic car. But some of those cars, there aren't garages to take care of them. So it's quite an individual technological relationship that you have with the cars. And we've kind of seen throughout time that there's almost less and less you can do with your car personally, the more computer programming is involved with the car's mechanical body. When those two systems are interlocked, it becomes quite difficult on the individual level, I think. Yeah,
and the electrical systems that are inside the car too.
Yeah. And I think what's really exciting to me, and this is a link that I've kind of like just made, so it's bubbling away in there, so it might be half baked.
Keep percolating it. Let's hear
but
it.
I'm really enjoying this period of innovation when it comes to electric vehicles, sustainable vehicles, solar cars particularly, where once again there's kind of like an opportunity for a hands-on technological moment or learning or education and extension with that vehicle again. So particularly when we've got 50-something students building a solar car, these are students who get to understand not only how a car works, but also like a lot of the technological innovations on the cutting edge. And I think it's bringing back almost that individual, more personal relationship with a car again. And I'd be excited for a lot of components of that to continue with us as we kind of reimagine cars as we move towards EVs.
That's an interesting perspective. I think a lot of time, if you're traveling, like if you travel a lot, you need a car like pretty much every day, then you have a personal attachment to that vehicle. And I think it's reasonable to say that it's important to build an understanding of the car, and you do anyway, about how it works and where you might be able to fix things or the sort of things you can do with it. But I'm also interested in whether or not vehicles should be a private asset or, for people who might not need a car all the time. I'm moving to Sydney soon, which is very exciting, and I probably won't need a car. But when I want to go to the mountains and go for hikes and that sort of thing, that's an interesting use case, I think, for some sort of vehicle that maybe might be a shared car or something else.
Yeah.
I'm interested in that idea as well, and how if less and less people have private cars too, it actually frees up extra space in your house as well, because you don't need the garage anymore.
Yeah. And have you seen that image of like this is how much space like 4 people in 4 cars take up, and then it kind of goes down to like how many people in that many people in a bus takes up this much space, how many people on motorcycles take up this much space, on bicycles, and then walking. I feel like there's a very interesting rewilding opportunity almost for our roads in that type of a future where there's less and less personal cars. And I'm also thinking about the educational upskilling piece at the moment about EV owners and how excited they are, in tune they are with how far their car can go before they refill. Or charge. And I think that's a really exciting moment for people to, extend their understanding of how much a certain wattage of energy means for them and their car in terms of distance. So I feel like there's this cool like new personal learning journey that's occurring when you're dependent on it and it's so new that you get to learn about it. And then you just want to tell all your friends. I've heard so many EV owners who are like, and then we're going to go on this road trip and we're going to stop here because that's how far our car can get safely. And it's like really cool that I think that they're paying attention to this, and it's like a conversational topic.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like, did you know that combustion vehicles lose 30% or about 30% of they only use about 30% of the fuel, the energy in the fuel. So they lose the rest of it as heat and noise and all that sort of thing. So an electric car is so much more efficient. It's amazing just in terms of the stored energy that you're using. And absolutely, like you were saying, Ella, it really helps people understand energy, and a house and an EV can contribute as much as a third to your household energy use. Wow. So then if you think about, these are all the different things I'm using in my house, and this is how it could compare to how far I could drive even.
So you've got kind of these methods to like measure.
Yeah, like the movement of yourself, your equipment. It could also be the activities you can do with that energy. You could think about how many washes you could do of your clothes, although we should all be washing our clothes less.
I thought you were just about to say we should all be washing our clothes.
Yeah, me
to
too.
listeners out there, I know you're stinky. I know
Well,
that's going to be a really big call out.
Well, I do think generally, I don't think I'm that smelly as a person, but I think I should.
Why is the conversation ended?
Sorry, that was my fault. So we should wash our clothes less. Is this a energy, but also like a microplastics thing? I know a lot of people are starting to wash all their clothing in a particular type of like delicates bag that captures the microplastics, stop it going down the drain of your clothes washing machine, and to collect it after the wash, because a lot of particularly polyester type materials will shed microplastics when they're being washed and also worn. So like that's an interesting side of it too, that's not just energy, but there's a whole bunch of cool ways to like help the climate a little bit more.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, so I'm someone who also can't afford an electric car, but I do have a hybrid, and I love it for very much for the efficiency reason. And even just having a hybrid, I've noticed like how much I've also saved on spending on like maintenance and also on petrol too. Like I only have to fill up once a month maybe, and even then I'm not even paying as much either when I do fill it up. So
the future's amazing.
Wow.
Yes.
If we think a little about cars and Australian identity again. So in the 1970s, there was this really famous Holden ad that was kind of like, oh, Aussies, what are you about? We're about footballs, meat pies, kangaroos, and Holden cars. And it was just a jingle that was repeated over and over in this ad, showcasing the new Holden car at the time and really trying to pair it with this national identity we have about like food, sport, and wildlife that are very quintessential to Australians. How do we think future EVs, electric vehicles, sustainable cars can piggyback off of that national interest and identity?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of really exciting ways that could turn, and a couple of maybe potential risks that we should be careful of as that progresses. As we pointed to before, maybe a car isn't something necessarily an individual has to own all the time, and this is where I'm wary as well of advertising and marketing being a push for consumption, and a car being quite a significant consumption in your life. You know, even if you have a zero emissions vehicle, there's a whole lot of embedded emissions in the process of making that. I think the split at the moment before an EV becomes more environmentally friendly than a petrol car is about 15,000 kilometers. So the embedded emissions in an EV are slightly higher than an equivalent petrol vehicle, but over the lifetime, an EV will save much more carbon emissions. I just want to make that clear because I think there's a bit of misconception around that, but they still have an associated carbon footprint. So we should be, I think, trying to consume, especially something that's energy intensive like a car, less. But I also think, you know, the idea of travel and movement around Australia is quite positive.
Maybe there's a piece to bring up the Australian value of mateship and kind of camaraderie with shared vehicles and shared modes of transport that can become part of this piece.
I mean, my dream is to have like a high-speed renewable train that takes me everywhere through Australia.
That might be a little far off.
No, but that's my ideal,
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah.
Because like I don't mind driving, but it would be great if I didn't have to think about it.
Yeah. And maybe another reason to be a little apprehensive about the individual EV is that it's not necessarily supporting our Australian manufacturing sector anymore. As you've both alluded to, like Ford and Holden's used to be manufactured here, and that's not happening anymore. And all these cars are being imported. So,
yeah, which goes back to the very start of the Australian car story. We were importing not only the cars, but also the fossil fuel petrol to move them. So all of that was coming in from overseas. And then there was a little bit of time where cars are being made here, some fuel from here, and now we've gone back to importing cars again, which is a little interesting and probably something we don't want to continuously see as a cycle. Moving on to technologies in the desert. So we kind of started that last question talking about a solar car, which is built to travel through the desert. I think there's something really interesting and exciting about Australian Technology and Desert Association. I think a lot of car ads or even Telstra ads at the moment are kind of like showing that they can withstand the desert as kind of like a security, quality kind of values messaging. I also think it's really interesting kind of the play on the iconic Australian landscape. Can we talk a little bit about technologies in the desert and kind of like what's come before where we are now and what might come in the next 20, 30 years?
Yeah, so if we're thinking about technology and innovation in a desert perspective, I think it's important and pertinent that we talk about first Australians always in the technology that they've developed and continue to use. And so the way that people read landscapes and have an understanding of and knowledge of the region and the way that they manage water sources is super important to moving across an arid country like Australia and across the desert. So I would say the technologies that have been developed to make that possible, like understanding where water holes are and understanding where shelter is important. And moving, and you see like woven bags and things for moving food and sustenance around as well. So that's really important. And then from a sort of European technology perspective, one of the really early success stories of Australia is the telegraph line that ran from Darwin to Adelaide. And both Isabel and I have done research and actually been out to the telegraph line.
Yeah, we have. Well, technically Ella has too, along the solar car trip.
That wasn't for research. That was pure fun.
So absolutely, the telegraph line, and which connected Australia back up to England and reduced the time of sending a letter from 5 months to 5 hours or something.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, it's crazy.
Made a huge impact on the way that communication moved around Australia, and also opened up whole sorts of other transport and trade routes along there, and the railway and as a way to move across the country. And then you sort of start to move into other forms of transport. So the railway only gets you so far. I think they had a lot of trouble in the Northern Territory with the railway. And so then cars become a particular way to cross the country, and there's these amazing stories of people getting a car and then just going for it.
Yeah.
And so that's so that's another amazing story, and that's probably the 20s that really kicks off, maybe the 1910s,
like 1920s, early 1900s. Yeah, crazy stories of people racing alongside trains as well. And then all of these women who get cars as well and start being the first women to drive around Australia and beating like land speed records too. Yeah.
Wow, awesome.
Cool.
Yeah, and then everyone, I think maybe most Australians, because of Qantas as a very successful airline, and everyone sat, or people who have been lucky enough to catch a Qantas 5 sat and watched the Qantas safety video where they talk about the origins of Qantas. So Qantas is a very Australian airline company. And they initially started out doing lots of the mail service in the Northern Territory and in Queensland. And in many cases, or in some cases, the plane beat the car to some of these remote regions, which is interesting. And I think a particularly Australian unique story in terms of how technology moves across the landscape. That's
so cool. So clearly there's a super rich history of innovation, technologies, problem solving across all of Australia, but particularly cool when there's such a wide spans of land to move across and to be continually developing technologies and kind of like iterating on them almost side by side, so you can see those past and presents almost merging together at some point and working together as well at certain points in time. Isaac, what do you think is going to come next?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's I think a really great point. Like, I would say now we have quite a dominance of fossil fuel based cars moving across the country. Like, we're talking long distances as opposed to cities, and airlines obviously still having a really important role to play. It's a very competitive, or maybe it could be more competitive, but it's a shame that the Regional Express Rex airline.
Yeah.
So I think there's a real technological challenge in servicing a lot of these remote communities, both from airline and land. And something that's really exciting that the solar car serves is a way to create the energy at the same time as you're moving and transported. The issue that a lot of people don't quite understand the first time they see a solar car. A lot of the time I get a question from someone seeing a solar car for the first time. They say, "Oh, when can I get one? When will everyone get one?" And absolutely, I'd love to be optimistic about solar cars. And the issue that I think that the biggest issue they have is that the sun only has a finite amount of energy to give in a certain area. So you might think about, when you get sunburn, that's sort of how I think about solar energy. You can, the sun has burnt your skin, so it's transferred energy into your skin that has damaged it. And so then if you think about putting a solar panel there, instead of sunburn, you're getting electricity.
But only in that little area.
Yeah.
And it's not going to get the underside of your arm.
No. So it's actually quite limited. So the electricity you can get from the sun is limited by the area you have. And when you're moving, it's important that space that you're moving is as small as it can be. So, the bigger your vehicle is, the heavier it's going to be and the harder it will be to move. So if you need a bigger vehicle, then you need more solar panels and you need more area. So it's actually a really tricky problem to play off the area you have for solar panels and the amount of energy you can get and the size of your vehicle and the weight and how much actually you're transporting. So these solar cars are very specialized and designed for the limits of that solar energy. So I think they only weigh about 150 kilos, not including the driver. So they're really light. And I think your new EV will be around a ton, so 1,000 kilos.
That's a lot more stuff to move.
A lot more stuff to move. And the sun doesn't necessarily give you the energy to do that easily. So I think we'll definitely see solar, as we've talked about, becoming more of the Australian ethos in terms of how we get our energy and how we move people around. Through like NRMA have done some solar EV charge points in the desert. So that could be a way that people can charge their EVs, wherever they're going based on solar charge points. So integrating electricity and EVs that we have now with the sun or other forms of energy will become more important in Australia, I think.
And what about way, 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 way in the future? Like, is my dream of a high-speed renewable rail going to happen?
Oh, I'd love it too, as much as you, I think. I'm not sure. I think, we have lots of opportunity for, I would say, my guess would be two main forms of potential transport. That would be like a high-speed rail which could be powered by electricity, or it could also be hydrogen or some other form of fuel, which is solar or renewable energy derived. Or it could be like a net zero flight, like planes that are powered off hydrogen as well. So we can generate hydrogen from renewable energy and then burn that in combustion engines, and the only outputs are water vapor. So that's like a very clean way of also using energy. So yeah, I'd say maybe high-speed rail, maybe planes.
Yay.
Can you explain a little how you get hydrogen energy from solar?
Yeah.
Or is that like a thesis and a 3-hour presentation?
No, actually, I think most people would have done this in their high school science class. I don't know if they would remember though. But all you need to do is stick 2 electrodes, so 2 pieces of metal, into a beaker or whatever you want to use of water. And then when you put electricity through, the electricity moving through the water separates the hydrogen and oxygen atoms inside the water. And then you have hydrogen on one side and oxygen on the other. And it's as easy as that. So I wouldn't recommend you do it at home because you're creating 2 very explosive gases.
Is this what happens in The Martian?
Yes, exactly. If you've seen The Martian, yes, that's what he's doing. So, and that's also some of the really exciting things about potentially finding water and ice on the moon or on Mars, because that would enable us to generate oxygen, which we need to breathe, and hydrogen, which could be used as a really useful rocket fuel. So that sort of energy is important for potential space travel, but also here on Earth, we can bottle up that hydrogen and use it in other forms as well.
So cool. Thanks for explaining that.
Yeah, it's very exciting.
I feel like we have almost all the elements we need for a really positive, renewable future. And it's now just like a game of, and a story of how do we get there together.
Yeah, absolutely.
This has given me so much hope for the future. What a nice episode. And what a good one to end on for the season too.
Yeah. Thanks so much for coming on, Isaac, and sharing with us all your knowledge about renewable energy and sustainable transport. Super exciting to finish up here. With I think a really positive aspiration and hope for our future.
Thank you for having me. It's been lots of fun.
I think we'll move into some questions for our audience.
Mm-hmm.
Listeners, what do you think is Australia's future culture?
And how is that culture going to get us to a radically sustainable world?
Yes. Let us know on our socials at @sci_burst on most social platforms or via our Gmail.
Okay, Isaac, the moment you've been waiting for.
The final question.
The final question. Can you please recommend for our lovely listeners 3 pieces of media they should go away, look at, enjoy?
Oh, okay. I've been thinking about this question all day and I'm not sure where my answer is going to go because I've got a few in my head, but I'm going to try and hit 3.
Mm-hmm.
The first one I would say is probably the sort of fun, relaxing one where you've maybe had a big day at work or university or wherever you are and you need some relaxing time. So it might be a game. And I would recommend Machinarium.
Oh,
Machinarium.
yes. I love that game.
The point and click?
Yes, point and click puzzle game. I think it came out in 2008 or something.
Yeah.
So I'm not
very
fresh
wild
to
game.
this one. I used to play it on the Mac at home.
Mm-hmm.
And then I found out they made a mobile version and they've actually re-released another game similar to Machinarium also on mobile. So that's
So cool.
so I can't remember the name of that one, but that's maybe going to be the next game and then I can report back on that one. But Machinarium is a huge favorite of mine. Yeah, it is like a point and click puzzle game where you're helping a lost robot to navigate this world. And it's sort of post-industrial, not quite apocalyptic, but he's sort of figuring it out. And then my second one would be a book, which I actually haven't read yet. So it's a recommendation for myself as well.
Oh my
It's
God.
a reminder
This
to
is so
yourself.
meta.
So this is Val Plumwood, Eye of the Crocodile. And it's about, so Val Plumwood was an ANU academic. And she was death rolled by a crocodile in Northern Territory. And she survived.
Okay, good.
And her kayak is actually, or her canoe, is in the museum. And it's on display in the museum.
Wow.
Or it's part of the museum collection. I'm not sure if it's on display at the moment. But she wrote a book about it, or it was sort of collected after she passed. And at the moment, I'm reading her other book. She was a philosopher about feminism and the mastery of nature, which is about how we should be interacting with the environment and how if we're looking for true equality in society, we need to remove some of those power structures that exist. We're not just looking for equality between men and women.
Mm-hmm.
So she's a super interesting philosopher and I'm really enjoying the rest of her work, but particularly interested in Eye of the Crocodile because it's meant to be really interesting. So that's my second.
Yep.
I feel like I can see you spinning the wheel in your head, trying to
Yes.
decide which is the lucky number 3.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, and my third one, which is a bit interdisciplinary and is a bit in the media at the moment because I think it's been nominated for lots of Grammys, but it's a piece of music, and it's the album Cowboy Carter by Beyonce, which I hadn't really listened to Beyonce before, but this is really good. And I never really thought I would get into country, and I know it's a bit controversial to say it's country, but I think Beyonce wants to think of it as a country album, so it is a country album. And it's just got a really nice mix of music, and I recommend listening to it the full way through because then you get the full idea of it.
Oh, I love albums
And
like that.
It's a perfect road trip album considering we've been talking about transport and movement because, it's got this sort of, this great varied textures and pacing and, perfect for a long car trip.
Oh, love it. Such good recommendations. People listening, if you experience any of these gorgeous pieces of media, please comment below and tell Isaac how good or bad his recommendations were. I'm sure he'd love to know
I would love
your
to
opinions
know.
on them.
Thank you very much. The positive ones, please.
Okay, hold the negative ones. No need for that. This is a very helpful episode. We're super excited to wrap it up and wrap up this season.
Mm-hmm.
So thanks everyone for sticking with us for a beautiful season of 10 guest episodes. We're super excited to say that next season, Cyverse is going back to basics. Me and Isabel in the studio, and there's going to be a theme for the whole season 3. And that theme is, as we've alluded to, you might have picked up on the breadcrumbs, it's going to be all about solar punk and getting to that future as a reality.
Yes, it is. Thanks everyone for listening. Stay nerdy, and we'll see you in the next season.
Whoa!
Thank you to ANU CPAS for their support and access to their podcast studio.